Leather is a very versatile material found in many applications around shoes, in the automotive industry, in upholstery, in furniture, garments, bags, you name it. Leather can be distinguished by the tanning technique used to make it. So for instance, there is vegetable tanned leather, oak bark tanned leather, different names for that exist or actually describe also slightly different tanning processes. This leather is usually quite stiff, has the typical leather smell, the typical fiber structure is very easy to recognize, and it is mostly used for sturdier articles like anything from a shoe sole to a saddle to boots, whatever, you name it. Chrome tanned leather is generally softer, generally more flexible. It has a bit of a grayish tinge to it, also has that typical leather smell, although to a lesser extent, and also the typical fiber structure. But generally, the easiest way to tell chrome tanned leather apart is that the flesh side or the inside of the leather always has a bit of a greenish, grayish tinge to it, and that the leather itself is a little more fatty than you would expect from a veg tan or from other tanning techniques. These are the main differences. There are other leather-based materials such as leather board or paper leather that consist of leather fibers, usually a byproduct of cutting leather, and these are then mixed with a binder, turned into these leather board pieces that are used, for instance, in heel blocks and welds. What looks like leather but is not leather, sometimes called patent leather or synthetic leather or faux leather or whatever you want to call it, usually is a plastics-based material, in most cases vinyl or polyurethane, applied to a fabric backer that is then used in place of leather, for instance, in shoe upper construction, in handbag making, in garments. But it's usually not as durable as leather, and sometimes the surface even chips, so either you can tell by that, or if you look at the back, if you see the backer and no fiber structure, then you can be sure it's that and not leather. Bonding leather is not really difficult. It is actually more a mechanical than a chemical process, because what you need to do is get the adhesive into the fibers, because what happens is that the long chain adhesive molecules kind of wind themselves around the leather fibers, interact with them, and that is what creates the bond. So if you're working on the flesh side of leather, all you need to do is make sure that you have a solid surface. So if you still have a bit of a fluffiness here that needs to come off, but other than that, grind it, put the adhesive on. In most cases, go with 2 layers, especially on veg tan, and to make sure that you have a full layer of adhesive on the surface. With certain Renia products, like our Top Fit, like our Ortec or our Aqualim 315, 1 layer is usually enough, but as always, use common sense. If the first layer completely disappears into the material, wait a couple of minutes and then add the next layer to it, because contact adhesives always need adhesive on both sides in order to work. That's contact adhesives 101. The difference in bonding chrome tanned leather and generally any leather that is a little fatty, a little oily, oil tan comes to mind here, many exotics come to mind, is that you need to reinforce the adhesive and make it resistant against these oily substances. Anything oily is a natural enemy to bonding. So first of all, anything that is oily, that is on the surface, or greasy, needs to come off. This can be achieved by cleaning the material with solvent, anything degreasing, after sanding, after grinding, and then applying the adhesive. But these chemicals come from inside the material, so you need to make sure that you make the adhesive resistant against anything that comes out afterwards, after this process is completed. Otherwise, the bond will just separate again. Also, same problem if the shoe that you're resoling with leather soles will be exposed to such circumstances, especially with leather. That's difficult if it soaks up oil and it goes through, and then it penetrates the adhesive layer and might break it down. So in order to do that, mix the adhesive of choice with our Renia Hardener C. Works with any Renia adhesive, any contact adhesive, and then work as normal. About 5 to 10% is sufficient, and you get a very resistant bond. Yeah, so much for this. For certain special applications such as bonding wet leather, moist leather, as it is done in saddlery, in cowboy boot making, or generally boot making, where the leather has to be warped, has to be pulled into shape. Can be done when the leather is wet, but then you either need an adhesive that remains on while you moisten the leather, or that you can apply to the wet leather. The second way of working can be accomplished using our Renya top fit, because not always is it possible to apply the adhesive beforehand. For instance, if you're cutting a channel into the leather, folding it up, this has to be done when it's wet, but then you have to apply the adhesive while the leather is still wet as well. Top fit is ideal for that because it has such a high initial bonding strength that it can actually do this. If you're working with our Aqualim water-based adhesive, this should never be applied to moist leather because the moisture will keep feeding the adhesive and it won't dry properly. But since Aqualim is fully water resistant when it is dry, it is possible to apply the Aqualim first, wait for about 20 minutes, half an hour, then submerge the leather, then get it wet, and the Aqualim will remain tacky and you will be able to bond. Now, this will certainly be sufficient for a bond that doesn't have to hold too much. If you're stitching afterwards, that's perfectly fine. If you want the bond to hold on the wet leather without any aid of stitches, you should definitely use the top fit. That's a much safer choice in this case. So as you can see, leather is easy to identify, easy to bond. Leather board, that's a bit more of a challenge, but mainly in order to keep the actual leather bond together. The trick here is to use our Syntic Total to get very good results both on welds and on heel blocks because of the great penetration capabilities of this adhesive. It really goes into that a bit more loose structure, reinforces it, and makes sure that the adhesive can really anchor itself in there. So Syntic Total in that case is the best choice. For real leathers, any Renya adhesive will work very well.